Welcome to the BLC Podcast, a ministry of Bethlehem Lutheran Church, ELCA, St. Cloud, Minnesota. On today's episode, Chad gives us an inside look on a personal level of what it's like to be a leader of a church in 2025. In a polarized society, where does a church fit into people's lives? What purpose and value does it have in a person's life in 2025? Stay tuned for this conversation and more on this episode. Thanks for tuning in. The Lord be with you. Well, welcome back to the BLC Podcast. I am Matt. I am here with
Chad.
It's Matt and Chad again here. Chad's going to be kind of taking the reins on this one and leading us and guiding us through this conversation, which I'm excited for. Chad's got an interesting topic for us to dive into and discuss. Chad, you want to take it and give us an idea of what we're going to be talking about here today?
Absolutely. So I meant to get this out a little bit earlier because I was thinking about 2025. It is a new year. We're not too far into it yet. And I wanted to play with this idea about what does church look like in 2025? But more specifically, I can talk all day long about the changes that are going on within religion in America. And I think most of the people who listen to this podcast, they're Bethlehem people. They're aware of some of these changes. I've talked about them before. But here's what I haven't talked about. I haven't ever talked about what it's like to be a leader in that, to be a pastor in the midst of all of these changes. And for yourself, Matt, to be a person who works in a church in the midst of a different culture, a different environment where church life in America, in St. Cloud, at Bethlehem even, is changing, and what that's like on a personal level. And I thought that would be a really interesting conversation to think about this, not in terms of wow, let's look at all the facts and figures and see what's happening and to kind of do a deep dive that way, although that's kind of interesting, but more of, well, how does this affect us personally? How do we live through this as leaders? What does this look like for us? Because what I think is that there's a lot of people in our congregation and just in the larger community as a whole who are asking some of these questions themselves or struggling with some of these issues themselves. And I would like to just be able to join them in that and more from a personal conversation. Yeah.
I like that. No, this will be interesting because I often wonder, about. I've never taken that extra step to become a pastor. I haven't felt called to do that in my life, though. I've gone through a process of discernment and all that stuff. Never felt called to lead in that way. So I'm very interested, of what it looks like for you as a pastor. I have nothing but respect and of any pastor out there leading in these types of times. As a person working with youth, I think it's a bit different than a head pastor or a lead pastor. But there's also quite a few changes too that come in that context as well. So
yeah. So here's how I want to open this up. So I think about my kids. So for the people who don't know, I have two kids. I'm not going to get too specific into any of their ages or dynamics or anything like that, but just, so people know, two kids, a junior and a freshman in high school. So not young kids anymore, getting older. And it's an interesting time to be a parent because if someone were to ask me, so Chad, as a pastor, do you think that your kids will be part of a faith community when they are outside your house, when they no longer have to go with you every Sunday, or it's no longer the expected thing for them to do because it's part of your family tradition? Do you think that they'll be part of a faith community? And nobody's ever asked me that before. I kind of wish people would, but...
Do you want me to ask you right now?
Ask Matt, ask.
Hey Chad, do you think when your kids are older that they'll be part of a faith community?
Matt, that is a fantastic question.
It just came right off the top of my head.
And I'll be honest with you in the response to that. I obviously can't know the answer to that, but I give it a 50-50.
Yeah.
Quite honestly. And that is coming from somebody who really has been and is intentional about faith formation in our family's life. Faith is a part of our family tradition. It is something that I'm able to talk about when it does come up with our kids, in ways that I think other people can't, just because it's what I do. And yet, even with all of that, I give it a 50-50 chance. And that's not to say that my kids haven't had a good experience with church. And that's not to say that they don't understand or have a faith and spiritual life. There's just a lot of interesting dynamics, which I kind of want to talk about in a second, that goes into that. And so the honest answer is like 50-50. And Matt, like, I'm going to ask you the same thing, I think. Like, your kids are younger than mine, but same question back to you. Like, I know it's a speculation question, but what do you think?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I as working with youth throughout the years, one thing I've come to kind of realize is that even going back to my own confirmation when I was confirmed, I look at my confirmation picture and all my classmates that were confirmed and how many of them continued to stay involved in the church community after confirmation. And it's the old saying, it's like, no, not a whole lot of them, not very many of them at all. Maybe there was like a few out of like 20 or something like that. But that's not to say that they still didn't have some sort of faith, but they just weren't participating in the faith community like they were up until that point. And that's been, throughout my years working in different churches, and after they're confirmed, you give it a 50-50 chance for your kids, but like it's way less than that on how many kids continue to hang out in the church after confirmation. But the old saying is true that once they have kids and stuff, they come back to the church because they want their kids to be raised in a church too. So all that to say, the one thing I did see in all of that is that the kids who have parents that are involved, the kids who had parents that didn't just drop them off and say, go get you some Jesus and I'll be here to pick you up, or just my kid's going through a hard time, here, fix them and I'll be back to pick them up. It's like that doesn't work. But the parents that are involved, the parents that you can tell faith is a real thing to them, their kids seem to grab onto it and stick with it.
Yeah.
And so that's my hope. Is that if, depending if me, my wife, we stick with it and it's just part of our life and we just share that in a natural way, that they'll pick up on that. And my hope is that they'll stay involved. As far as giving a percentage chance, I don't know. That's a tough question.
It is. And again, my kids are a little bit older, so we've had some of these conversations.
Yeah.
Which is why I guess I'm a little bit more comfortable giving it a percentage, because I'll just let me play this out just a little bit further here and to give you a kind of a glimpse on why I think the way that I do about this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back again, and personal story time, right? So when I was growing up, people would ask me, when I'm getting to know people, and when I was a kid, it's like, so what's your dad do, or what's your mom do, or what's your parents do? And my mom didn't really, she worked, but she worked in a school, and her life and her job wasn't ever that interesting. And it really wasn't the focal point. So I never really spent that much time like talking about what my mom did. But my dad, he had a pretty cool job.
Yeah.
He was a pilot. He was in the Air Force. He flew planes. He was overseas. He was doing different stuff.
Yeah, just hearing about your dad recently over this past year was kind of amazing.
Yeah, well, and he has good stories. And so as a kid, you're growing up with that, and it's kind of fun. I felt it was a positive thing for me to be able to tell a little bit about, his story, what he did, and all those things. And I think that's, for a lot of kids, they talk about, their family, and then they talk about their parents, and they talk sometimes about what their parents do.
Yeah.
And even if it's boring, like, kids still talk about what their parents do. And here's the thing, again, personal piece now. So when my kids are asked kind of like, what do your parents do? They'll talk about my wife, and, they'll say to my mom, she's a principal at a school. And then they'll say, yeah, my dad. Yeah, my dad. And it does come out eventually that, yeah, my dad's a pastor. And here's what's interesting about that. And I've joked about this in the past, but even for my kids, the response that they get from their peer groups when they learn initially that this is what their dad does, it's not a reaction that's like, wow, that's kind of like a boring job. Like, you know, if you were to say my dad's an accountant or my dad does some generic business stuff, like that's not very interesting. But it's not just that it's not interesting. For a lot of their peer groups, it's actually not a good thing. Like it's they have to, my kids have to navigate this already in high school about, oh, so like, you know, what kind of person is your dad? Because they make assumptions about, well, you know, like church people, they've hurt some people before. They're not very inclusive. They don't welcome everybody. They're kind of there's a lot of negativity associated with that. And it sure does not help my kids when they're thinking about, do I want to be a part of a faith community when my peer group doesn't really respect that? Yeah. And I think that is so hard because even if you have a great experience in a church, it doesn't mean that you want to be associated with a group of people that your peer group thinks are harmful. Right. And that's a very interesting place to be. And so, needless to say, we don't host many parties at our house.
Maybe you could coach your kids to rephrase it and be like, my dad's a nice pastor.
Yeah, right?
My dad's a loving pastor. My dad's an accepting and lovable guy.
Right?
He
nice
also
guy.
works at a church.
Yeah, but it is interesting because they don't invite friends over to our house. Yeah. They don't. And part of that is because they're trying to distance themselves even from what I do. And I'm like, man, I don't know how to think about this.
Well, part of that, though, is just being a dad.
100%. Now,
even the coolest dads on earth, their kids are going to think they're pretty dumb sometimes.
Right. Oh, I agree with that 100%. Not going to argue that. But it is, like I said, it's different, though. Because it's one thing to say that your dad is just, you know, out of touch and just a doofus, you know, and just kind of like your dad. But it's another thing when your peer group, like this is not them thinking that their dad is uncool and so they don't want to invite kids over. Yeah. This is them reading their peer groups, reading the reactions and reading the culture and reading the value that people place on that, you know, and going, yeah, we're going to go over to this other person's house.
Yeah. And honestly, can you blame them?
No.
Like with like, just if you weren't, you know, a pastor just thinking about, gosh, you know, like I have this background growing up in the ELCA Lutheran Church and just that's such a foundation for me and everything it, you know, it stands for and it's just such a big, and I know it and you know, but for better or worse, it's like my part of my family, you know, it's like right. And so like I have that view, but for others that don't have that view, and if I didn't have that view, I don't know what church I could trust or how long it would take me to build that trust or to even say this was worthwhile.
Absolutely.
It would be really, really hard in today's
100%.
World.
And that is, you know, that's again, so when I talk about like, you know, how does this affect me? Well, like there's one level like, well, that just kind of stinks because like, again, I'm not unrealistic. I know my kids are going to be teenagers, but I also am like, oh man, I really have a desire to connect because I enjoy people. Yeah. And already within like my kids' peer groups, there's a hesitancy about bringing them over because there's this stigma associated with what I do and just the church in general. And here's the part that I never, like, again, personal piece, the part that really kind of like, I don't know what to do with. Because this is an experience, speaking of high school youth again, we're kind of on that topic right now, where you can have a really good experience at this place, like at Bethlehem. And most people who are connected here, youth, adults, children, they really do find it to be a good place. I mean, it's a good culture. It's a good community. It's affirming. It's welcoming. It's inclusive. We try hard at that actually, and so what people will say is that this place really is good, but you can't still compete with all of the other voices that are out there. And so while somebody will say, here's again, another personal story here that I've had with this place. One of our students years ago here who identifies as queer said that, you know what, she cannot continue to be a part of the church because she and her community don't feel welcome in places like this.
Yeah.
And I asked her, what about your experience at Bethlehem? And she's like, oh, it was a good experience. Great. Did you ever feel unwelcome here? No, absolutely not. And yet her community doesn't, therefore she walks away. And that is one of these personal pieces again where I'm like, shoot, like I really want to be able to connect with people, and yet there's so much of this bad blood out there when it comes to organized religion for so many people that it's hard, even if they have a really great experience, to stay connected.
Yeah.
And here's what's funny, Matt. Like, let me ask you this. Here we go, because this is the logical part of me that goes, how is this the case? Because if you, well, I mean, just think about your own kids or yourself too. Like, so if you're in school and you go to school, it's a new school year, and you go into the class and you meet your teacher, and your teacher just turns out to be not so great. It's a not so great teacher, and it's a not so great year because that teacher is not so great. Do you walk away from that experience, or would you teach your kids after that experience was over, all teachers are bad? Or would you say, you know what? There's a lot of teachers in this school. Some are going to be really good. Some are probably going to be not so good. Give it another shot, because you know what? There's going to be a teacher that you might get next year that might be completely different. Right?
No, I would absolutely say that, no, that was a bad experience.
Right.
Like, you can learn a lot from that bad experience and use it as you go into the next. This is what the Rate My Professor is for. There should be a Rate My Pastor out there somewhere.
There probably is. Yeah, right?
Jenks, you owe me a Coke. Yeah, no, but I would say, that's just one experience, and that's what it's like in church. Working at churches, I've had good experiences and bad experiences.
Right.
And you have to, I don't know, how do you get people to understand that the church is people, and therefore there's going to be some messed up stuff that happens, but
right.
In and of itself, it can be so good too,
And this is the challenge. And this is the interesting part too, Matt, because what I've found is that people, by and large, like you just said, when it comes to other institutions like education, they will be more than willing to say, this was a bad year.
Right.
This was a bad teacher. We're going to, it'll be fine next year, because we know, intellectually, we know, even though it was hard, it's not like that everywhere. And even if it's a school district that you don't necessarily like, that doesn't mean you think all schools are bad.
Right.
You might move districts, and you might have a totally different experience, and you're open to that. But there are many things that we do like that. Like, if we experience poor customer service in a particular restaurant, we don't say that all food service industry employees are bad.
Right.
But yet in religion, in churches, that does not tend to go like that, because if somebody experiences, well, I had a bad experience with this, or the church said this, well, now all churches, all religion is painted with that same brush.
Do you think it comes from a place of, like, the church can be something a lot more, I don't know if deep is the right word, but like such a personal, meaningful piece of who you are, that if it does go bad, you feel betrayed in a way, and almost on a deeper sense than if it's just a bad teacher, I hate school anyway.
Right. Right.
I don't know.
Maybe. And again, I don't have like the answer to this. And this is kind of
Yeah.
where the challenge is from a leadership perspective, like in the midst of this, and why it can be hard. But again, for me, it comes down to this, like the distancing of relationships. That probably is one of the hardest parts of the job. And I'm not talking about like when people die or if they move away. That happens. And I mean, if you're close with people, you're close with people. But there's something different about having people intentionally just say, you know what? I think I want to stop doing this. And it's not even that they again have had a bad experience, like specifically at Bethlehem, because most people haven't.
Yeah.
They just tend to just get to the point in their life where they need to say, you know what, I need to step away from this for a while. And again, my last little anecdotal story with this. So absolutely not getting into politics. Do not want to talk about politics, but we definitely live in a polarized country right now, and politics are just amped up so high right now.
Yeah.
And we, being Bethlehem, or me being a pastor, it's interesting because you get caught in the middle of that, and it's a weird thing again because it goes like this. I'm going to kind of generalize a little bit, but this happens. So you have somebody who, let's just say, are further left, they're progressive, and they say, you know what? I don't know if I can be a part of this congregation anymore because Christianity in America just doesn't seem to be a healthy place.
Yeah.
I hear all of these things that are going on, and I don't want to be associated with the brand, so to speak. Like it's icky. It's almost like my kids again, where I have friends who I don't want them to know that I go to church. It's not good for me. And on the other side, you have really conservative people who will say to places like Bethlehem, I don't think I can be connected here anymore. You guys, your theology is too inclusive. You welcome in people that you really shouldn't welcome in. And so you get it from both sides, and you lose relationships. People walk away, and quite honestly, from that personal perspective, that I can tell you is probably the hardest thing about the work that we do. It's those people that you end up just losing from your life and from the community's life that intentionally, for these different reasons, want to discontinue their relationship. And that is challenging.
Do you think they're discontinuing the relationship with the church or like faith altogether?
It's
Or is it like just the organized church? Like, I'm cool with God, because I hear a lot of people be like, I'm cool with God, I just don't like his people.
Right? Well, and that's...
Yeah, I can understand.
I can too. And I know a lot of people who exist in that camp too.
Yeah.
It's so I would say most people who have been committed for most of their life to a religious organization, to a faith tradition, they will continue to have that as part of their life. But the way that they practice it is no longer a part of a community. And which leads me again to this question of like, well, I don't know how you do that all the time on your own, because for me, I have to have a community to be able to remind me of the story that we embody and how we live together in this kind of community, not in perfect, not in perfection, but just with the good and the bad that goes together with that. So it's I mean, needless to say, 2025 is an interesting year. And from that personal perspective of what it's like to be a pastor in the midst of that, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also just a lot of these just challenges right now that I think are somewhat unique. This has not been true for all times in all places.
No. And just having been a youth worker since I guess I started around the year 2000, believe it or not, as a camp counselor. But the way community was built. It was almost built in. It almost existed just because the church was there. And so like you'd have this community of kids that wanted to hang out and be together and goof off and play and learn about God and all this kind of stuff and get in trouble and all that stuff. But now it takes a lot more intention to build that community,
Right.
to get them, talking off of their phones. And this is not me saying that, oh, kids these days. This is just me saying like it's harder to build community now because they have so much community right in the palm of their hand,
Right.
And community that they can, however they are, however they're finding their identity now, whatever it involves, like even if it's weird, like they're gonna find some place online that has that community that will support whatever that is,
Right.
and so you don't need the church anymore to give them that community.
So you were leading into this is perfect.
Oh, good.
Okay. Ask me another question, Matt. Ask me this question.
Okay.
So, Chad,
What
value does church have anymore in 2025?
That's a good question. I'm glad I just asked you that.
No, I think that's really important because, we've just spent however long just talking about, from a personal perspective, kind of like the challenges behind that and why it's so challenging. And yet we're both still here.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I still intentionally choose to do this work.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why. And especially right now, I think places like this are more needed than ever, even though not everybody sees it, but I do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the other piece that I want to offer to all of our listeners is, okay, so I hope that you've identified a little bit with where we personally have been, because I think a lot of you are there. But now you're asking yourself too, well, what is the value that we have?
Yeah.
And so here's my piece on that one. And I want to know what you think about this one, because this is not my idea. This comes off of, I read a lot and read a guy by the name of Brian McLaren. He's one of my go-to people when just for people who are thinking about this stuff. And he's come up with this way of thinking about faith development and different stages of faith development. And again, the problem with stages is that people just assume that there's a natural progression and that the further stages are better than the earlier ones. And that's not true at all. This is just a way of thinking about how our faith works.
Okay. I'm excited to hear this.
All right, here we go.
Let's do it.
So you have like stage one starts out as simplicity. And that is pretty much as like we learn as children. Like if your parent, says, don't touch the stove, you're going to burn your hand. Your Sunday school teacher might say, don't curse. It makes Jesus cry.
Yeah, lies make little baby Jesus cry.
Oh man. But it's very straightforward. It's very black and white. It's how children often learn.
Sunday school Jesus.
Sunday school Jesus.
Okey-doke.
And and for a lot of adults, will often stay here because it's very comforting.
You learn the basics.
You learn the basics, but
the
basics
rules down. Okay.
Yep.
Follow that.
Yes. And for the most part, in a world where there's all kinds of questions, it provides a lot of stability for people.
Sure.
And so people stick around here for a while until something doesn't work.
Right.
Until they have a question that they're not supposed to ask, that they just can't help but ask, or something happens to them in life that makes them question the narrative, the story that they've been told not to question, and they end up in this stage of complexity then.
Okay.
So it goes from simplicity to complexity, and complexity, it's still very, it's more open. So there's questions are invited, but it's full of the complexity of how to address those questions. So you might say, here are the 8 ways of dealing with whatever it is in life. It's a self-help kind of piece where there's a program for that. There's a program that will teach, your elementary school children this, and there's a program that will teach your your middle school kids this, and there's a program that will teach your high school kids this. And if they're depressed, here are the 4 steps that they can do in order to avoid depression, so on and so forth. So it's more complex, but it's still very much in this, we have an answer for you, but it's a little bit more complex than just we tell you this is how it is.
Okay, so it's getting a little bit deeper. Into, answering those questions that used to be simple in your mind, but now it's getting deeper and you need a little bit more substance. You need a little bit more background. You need a little bit.
But at the end of the day, there's still, it's still very defined.
Okay.
There's still, it, instead of being told this is what you should think, it is here we'll engage in a year-long study so that you can think this.
Okay.
I mean, so it still has an end goal in mind of where you need to be within the faith, but again, they just acknowledge the fact that there's complexity within this, and so we're going to teach it as more of a complex thing.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, it's still not an open invitation to just kind of go outside of what is the prescribed, faith tradition.
Okay. So we have simplicity and then
Complexity. Yep. And then in complexity, again, as what will often happen, they'll say, people will go through this and they'll find, a lot of people find a lot of satisfaction in that. But some people, they'll go through this and they'll be like, okay, here are the 8 steps for achieving happiness, biblical happiness. I'm just I'm making this stuff up. And they go through all of this, and at the end of the day, they say, that didn't work. I still don't feel happy. This isn't satisfying to me still.
Okay.
Or, yes, and my church leaders engaged in these horrible, unethical practices. And my faith community fell apart. And this thing that was built up as so good turned out not to be so good. And then they're moved through that level of doubt into perplexity. So you have simplicity, black and white, complexity, a little bit deeper, but still very straightforward.
More gray though.
Yep, a little bit more gray. Perplexity, everything's gray.
Everything's gray.
You don't even know what to think anymore.
You're just kind of like, okay.
This is within like Catholic spirituality. This is dark night of the soul.
Okay.
This is, I don't know if God's real. I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know who to trust anymore. I don't know like if an institution can even be capable of providing this kind of spiritual direction that I need. And it's a very lonely place.
Yeah.
That is a stage full of deconstruction, of going back and looking at everything that you think you know, everything that you were taught, and going, can I still believe this? Can I still be Christian? Can I still be a rational, intellectual, scientifically minded person and have faith? Can I be a part of a community that has a history of not just great philanthropy, but also great harm? I mean, it's a very soul-searching time, and it's essential that leads into the final stage of faith, which is harmony. And this is where I think it is all about harmony. Like, this is where I think the true value of any faith tradition leads us to. Because in harmony, it's less about the intellectual belief. It's less about an institution. It's less about having the right answer. And it's more about this deep, deep understanding of God as this divine being that above all can be understood as love. And not love in this superficial kind of way, but this deep sense of commitment and this deep bond that holds people together, that has a sense of care for creation, that has a sense of care for your neighbor, that doesn't distinguish between necessarily in-group and out-group, but sees people as human beings with shared humanity who are loved by God. And when you reach this place, even for a moment, when you glimpse it, it's huge. And it provides this relief, because no longer do you have to be concerned with being right. or correct beliefs even.
Or proving things about God.
All of that. or relying on an institution.
Yeah.
You become so enmeshed in this care for others as you understand God cares for you. And I think we need this now more than ever.
Yeah. Do you think, wow, yeah, I love that. The dark night of the soul stage, that what perplexity, is that what's up?
Yeah.
Do you think that's where a lot of people give up before getting to that final stage, which is almost like, I almost see it as like, you know, the seed and growing and dying and coming back to life and resurrection and all that stuff, and getting to that final stage and really feeling what God's kingdom is like and all about.
Yes. And in perplexity, that can go on for a long time. And people can absolutely just lose all hope in that. I mean, it happens. And then that's not to say that they never will find this harmony. Harmony brings together both faith and doubt.
Yeah.
And it holds them together. It doesn't try to separate them out. It doesn't try to say, well, don't ask that question. It says, we'll take your doubts and we'll take your faith and we'll put them together, and we will exist in community as, you know, as these people who have hope in the midst of all the struggles with life.
Yeah.
And again, we need this, I think, in a polarized environment. Our kids need to know how to live like this. Our kids need to know that they don't have to be perfect, that they can be forgiven, that they can practice forgiveness. It's such an important piece of life, and it's something that I think uniquely that the church can offer.
Yeah.
And that is why I keep doing what I do.
Yeah. So what does that look like, do you think, at a tangible level of how does the church help people get through that, go through those stages, which I'm sure happen different for everybody? Is it what's that look like?
I think it's walking with people and helping them to take that step deeper, go a step deeper with whatever place they find themselves in. It's acknowledging people's doubts. It's acknowledging people's questions. It is making room and space for, again, just all types of people in different places, and again, pushing people too to go deeper. We all carry our baggage with us, and sometimes it just takes a while to process all of that. And I think, again, the best churches out there, the best faith communities out there, allow people to do that in really healthy ways.
Make a safe place for people to go through that.
Absolutely. So that's where I'm at, Matt. Like that's why, as much as the personal side of what it is to be a leader in a time where a lot of faith in America is just declining, or participation and engagement, it's still, for me, one of these things where I can't just not do it. Like I can't just give up on it.
Well, it's because it's a part of who you are.
It is a part of who I am, but also because I think it's such an important part of what we need. And I think, because again, the options for the ways that we live, we can live in many different ways. A lot of people identify by their politics. A lot of people identify, by, I don't know, there's other aspects of life that people do. But generally speaking, we form in-groups and out-groups. We find our tribe, our people. We identify with them. These are our family. These are our friends. These are the people who think and look like us. And in a polarized community, like it's our group against everybody else. And I just don't think that is a good place to be. I don't think it leads to positive results as society. And I think the church is the church when it helps people to expand their circle to include the people that they often think are against them.
Right.
And I think that is the kingdom of God that Jesus speaks of and lives out. And it's, in Brian McLaren's words, it's a place of harmony. And I think many religions even strive for that.
Yeah. Very good.
There we go. So a little bit of a deeper
episode. I like it.
Deeper episode, but yet I think it's a positive one too, because it's a challenging time, and yet the work is so important for this community of faith to continue to exist and be strong in what we do.
Absolutely. Yep. And we know that people are going through it right now in many different ways and many different facets of life. Life is not easy for many right now. So my hope and prayer is that the church and this place would be a place that you do feel safe to go through it with you. That way you'll find community to meet you where you're at, to love you where you're at, accept you where you're at, and help you get through another day with faith. With faith.
There it is. It's hope. I mean,
it's faith, hope, love.
I mean, and that's really what faith is. Faith is hope. It is a life lived with hope.
With hope. Yep.
There we go.
That's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
All right.
I like it.
All righty, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. Please do let us know what you thought of this episode. You can email myself or Chad. My email is mmetz@bethlehemlutheran.org, and Chad's is...
It's long. It's C. Peterson with an O-N, not E-N at the end.
at bethlehemlutheran.org. So send us your thoughts, send us your ideas on other topics you would like to see us tackle. We hope you are having a blessed day. And anything else, Chad?
No, it's 2025. It's kind of a late Happy New Year, but it's still a new year.
And so we'll be back at it again, hopefully next month with another episode. And thanks for listening, folks.
Take care.
See you next time. Or we'll hear you next time. Or something.